Everyone has a darker side to them than they let on. And the man behind the mouse is no exception. July 6th, 2015. User blog created or updated. Hi, my name's Toby. I'm 27 years old, and my occupation consists of research on historical phenomenon. Occasionally, I'm forced to step out of my comfort zone to take a look at something. Whether it be an old doll or anything generic like that. Those are bearable. It's part of my job to examine such things. But there was one thing in particular, though. One thing that you'd never think to be different. I received a phone call early last Saturday. Seemed to be a regular client. He didn't seem like he wanted to talk for very long, though. His tone was rushed, and he barely responded to any questions that I asked him. He told me that he had an old VHS tape that he found buried in his garage, and he wanted me to check it out. Before I could even agree to checking it out, he just thanked me and hung up. Now, I'm not really complaining about it. It's not often I get to check out something like that. Piqued my interest. Plus I had an old VCR that I received from months before, so I was definitely going to see what was up. A few days later, after I received the call, a package came in the mail. The label on the wrapping read, Disney, in black marker, nothing else. And I thought that I hit the jackpot. Not just because Disney was one of the biggest in animating ever, and getting an old tape like that was huge for someone like me, but, also because I had a son, Max, who loved that kind of stuff. I thought it would make for some great father-son time, to sit down, watch some old cartoons, and, we did just that. But before I tell you what we saw, please be aware that the content that you're about to read is intensely disturbing. And if you expect there to be an answer to any of it, there just isn't one. I would advise you to read with caution. The episode on the tape was labeled White Noise. The episode started with Mickey walking down a dirt trail, toward what seemed to be a small warehouse with a plane in front of it. He had on the same silly grin that he always did in his old cartoons, except every now and then the film in the tape would sort of shift out of place. And I could swear that it looked like he was dragging his body in midair while he was moving. Eventually he reached the warehouse and he walked up to the plane. This is where it gets weirder, though. Mickey climbed into the plane and ignited the engine. So naturally, the propeller started to run. He then climbed back out of the plane and stood in front of it, tapping his foot with a concerned look on his face. Then he grinned and stuck his hand in the propeller. His expression then turned to dread as he started to scream, while his hand was being mutilated. Max grabbed a hold of my arm as we watched in horror. Mickey then pulled his arm away from the propeller, stared at it for a moment, and then began to smile. Then he turned his face toward the screen as it slowly panned towards him. Then it cut to black. I looked at Max, and he was crying. He looked up at me and asked what had happened. I honestly couldn't even tell him. I didn't know either. I was dumbfounded. I didn't know that would happen. But I assured him that it would get better if we just kept watching. And he trusted me. He shouldn't have, though. Knowing what I know now, I should have just gotten him out of there while he had seen what he did. It gets stranger. The black screen then cuts to Mickey standing in the corner of a dark room, nodding rapidly, with a huge grin on his face. Max felt some sort of reassurance over this, for some reason, as there wasn't anything utterly disturbing happening. Barely anything was visible, but occasionally, by looking closely, we could see Mickey twitching violently. And after a few seconds or so, the screen started to slowly pan out, away from Mickey so that it became even harder to see. We leaned in to try to get a better look. Huge mistake. As we leaned in to see better, the screen then rapidly sped into Mickey's face and brightened, revealing a gruesome, clawed, torn-up face with a massive grin bearing human-like teeth, along with noticeably bloodshot eyes. Max went ballistic. He started to scream as he clung to my arm as if for dear life. He started to cry as I held him close to my chest, and then he looked up at me. "Daddy, why is Mickey being so scary?" he asked as tears streamed down his face, still sobbing. I told him that I didn't know. I had never in my life seen anything as horrifying as that. Let alone in a Disney cartoon, which is made for children. For fucking children! I told Max to leave. I didn't want him to watch any more of it. He'd seen enough. I wasn't sure that I wanted to keep watching myself. But I had to. I fucking had to. Not because I'm an idiot, and it certainly wasn't because I wanted to write some cheesy campfire story, but for the sake of curiosity. It was literally pulling me in. I had to finish it. There was no way I could stop it. The episode then cut to a straight line of text in front of a jet black background. H-A-H-A-H-A-H-A-H-A. No noise at all, just text. It then abruptly jumped to the mutilated Mickey face, closer to the screen than before, and a loud, hyper-distorted moan rang throughout the speakers. I closed my eyes to attempt to avoid the image, but I could still see it faintly. And after a few moments, everything stopped. I heard a faint, fuzzy sound. I opened my eyes and looked up at the screen to be met with static. I thought it was over. I let out a huge sigh of relief and reached for the remote sitting beside me. No. I stopped and looked back at the screen to find the static slowly fading, revealing a plain white Mickey face buried beneath the static. My mouth hung open while I stared at the mouse. It spoke to me. It knew I was trying to turn off the TV. How did you? I said, whispering to the screen. Mickey smiled, sporting a massive, toothy grin. It hurt me. Your heart will suffer greatly, it said in a stern, deep voice. A series of ha-has then flashed rapidly in front of the static, along with a loud screeching sound. I had to cover my ears, it was so loud. The remote was right next to me. I could have at least tried to end it, but the horrid sound made it hard to move my hands from my ears. It didn't stop. I didn't care anymore. I didn't care if I went deaf just to stop it. I reached for the remote and shut it off. My ears rang for a good few minutes, but luckily they didn't explode. I looked over to the doorway to find Max standing there. I scolded him for not listening to me when I told him to stay away, but he didn't hear me. His eyes were glued to the screen and he was frozen solid. "It's not over," he said, still staring at the screen. "What? What do you mean?" I asked, but he didn't respond. The TV then turned on by itself. I looked back at the screen to find what seemed to be a snuff recording of Cinderella's castle at Disneyland. I looked back over to Max. He gave me a quick glance, then redirected his attention to the screen. How the hell did he know that it wasn't over? How the hell could he know? The episode then cut to the park versions of the mascots in what seemed to be a dank basement, standing perfectly in a line facing the camera. I urged Max to get out once more, as if I could predict what was going to happen, but he wouldn't move. He just stared. The mascots then reached their sides. "Max, get out!" I yelled at him. He didn't move. Pulled out knives. "Get out, Max!" I yelled louder. He remained frozen and slit their own throats. "Max!" I screamed. They started thrashing around the room, spraying blood all over the floor and walls of the dimly lit room, then dropped to the floor. Max just stared at the bloody mess while I tried desperately to hold back vomit. The episode then ended with a still shot of the lifeless costumes, with one of them holding a plain white card, with the words "The End" scribbled onto it in the Disney font. I looked over to Max. He was staring at me now, with a wide grin on his face. He then raised his hand from his side, revealing a knife. He spoke. "Suffer," he said. He then jabbed the knife into his throat and dropped to the floor. I screamed and rushed over to him, trying my hardest to talk him through the sobs and screams, even though I knew he was already gone. I looked over the TV, and in the middle of the screen, I saw the plain white Mickey face, laughing, staring at me. Then it spoke to me once more. The darkest of secrets lie within the brightest of smiles. The TV then shut off, and I was left alone with my son's lifeless body. I started to cry as I buried my face into Max's chest, holding onto his hand as it all came to a close. But my crying ceased. I let go of my son's hand as I looked up to the screen and mumbled the same words he had said before when I thought it was over. It's not over yet. End of user blog.